He wasn't meant to make it through the night. 3 German Shepherd pups, no more than 6 months old, hung limp and bound by their necks, swaying from a frozen tree branch deep in the wilderness of Wyoming. No collars. No names. Just the faintest whimpers, smothered by the howling winter wind. And yet, when the wolves came, they did not cry. One of them, the biggest, pressed its trembling body between the others, shielding them as the cold bit through fur and bone. They didn't wait for rescue. They waited for a miracle. Miles away, 3 U.S. Marines were on patrol, men hardened by war but softened by the ghosts of the dogs they'd once loved and lost. When they heard the distant cries, something inside them stirred, a pull too strong to ignore. What they discovered that night would change everything. This isn't just a rescue story. It's a reminder that even in the coldest places, God still sends warmth, sometimes wrapped in fur and carried on 4 legs. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and if you believe that love, especially a dog's love, is proof that God never forgets the broken, hit subscribe and type amen below. What comes next may make you cry, but it will also make you believe again. The wind sliced through the pine trees like a knife. It was a bitter, gray afternoon in Hollow Creek, Montana, a speck of a town barely noticeable on any map. Surrounded by frostbitten ridges and thick, whispering forests, it looked like the kind of place time had forgotten. Snow fell again in soft spirals, layering over the deep white blanket already covering the ground. The stillness was eerie, the kind of silence that usually warns that something bad is about to happen. Buck Halverson trudged through the snow, his boots barely crunching even as the frozen brush cracked beneath him. He was in his late 60s, stooped, wiry, and still sharp in a way that felt dangerous. His long gray beard tangled with snowflakes, and his heavy canvas coat, frayed and stained with age, did little to soften his hard edges. Buck was a man who had long decided he didn't need anyone. Once, he'd owned a dog training center on the outskirts of Hollow Creek, Halverson Kennels, but that ended years ago after too many complaints of neglect and cruelty. Since then, he'd lived alone in a rotting cabin buried deep in the woods. His name drifted through town like a curse you only say once, low, bitter, and best forgotten. But Buck wasn't entirely alone. 3 German Shepherd puppies, Blitz, Rook, and Ember, trailed after him through the snow. Barely 6 months old, they had no collars, no tags, no past worth mentioning. They'd been found in a cardboard box near the highway weeks ago, abandoned and starving, before somehow stumbling their way to Buck's door. Blitz was the largest, already showing signs of the muscular frame his breed was known for. His sable coat shimmered under the pale sun, and his golden-brown eyes carried an alert, curious light. A scar marked his left eyebrow, a thorn's reminder, and a faint limp made his stride uneven but strong. Rook, the smallest, was a black and tan bundle of nerves, quick-eyed and twitchy, constantly scanning the woods as if danger lived behind every tree. His energy was electric, fast, reactive, and full of fear. Ember, the lone female, had a reddish hue to her fur and eyes that burned like amber glass. She moved gracefully, almost soundlessly, her steps light as whispers. She rarely barked, but her gaze always drifted to Blitz, steady, silent, loyal. The pups followed Buck with the blind trust that only the innocent possess. He had fed them scraps, raw meat, old bread, whatever was left, and they mistook it for kindness. They didn't understand how broken souls can use compassion as bait. Buck stopped at a clearing surrounded by tall, ancient pines. He dropped his pack, pulling out a slab of venison soaked in dark blood. The smell made Rook whine and Ember lick her lips. "Easy now," Buck muttered with a crooked grin. He placed the meat on a rusted metal tray nailed to a tree stump. Then he reached for something else, thick hemp ropes, rough and stained from old use. Blitz barked once, confused but unafraid. Buck's grin faded. His face hardened into something sharp and cold. "Good boy," he murmured, crouching low. The pup wagged his tail, stepping forward. In one swift movement, Buck looped the rope around Blitz's front legs, twisting fast and tight. Blitz tried to pull away, but Buck's grip was faster. Rook barked in panic, backing into the snow. Ember froze, trembling, confused, her eyes wide with disbelief. One by one, Buck worked quickly. He tied Blitz first, hauling the rope over a branch until the young dog's paws left the ground. Blitz whimpered, then barked in panic, legs kicking helplessly. The others circled frantically, unsure whether to fight or flee. Rook darted for the trees, but slipped on ice. Buck caught him by the scruff and repeated the act. The smaller pup's cry pierced the cold air, a high, desperate sound that echoed through the forest. Ember didn't run. She didn't fight. She only stared into Buck's eyes, silent, her whole body shaking. When he lifted her last, she didn't resist. 10 minutes later, it was done. 3 puppies hung like forgotten ornaments, ropes biting into their legs, their breaths shallow and trembling. The wind rose, carrying the scent of blood through the trees. Somewhere far off, a wolf's cry echoed, distant but hungry. Buck stepped back, inhaled the icy air, and smirked. "That'll bring 'em," he muttered. "They'll come." Then he turned and vanished into the forest, his boots crunching through the snow until the sound was swallowed by the wind. Back in Hollow Creek, the locals were busy with their usual routines, sipping coffee at diners, gossiping at the gas station, pretending not to notice the silence that sometimes came from the woods. They all knew Buck was off, cruel, unpredictable, but no one expected this. Some remembered hearing barking from his cabin, then sudden silence that lasted too long. Others recalled a stray found behind his shed, tied up and half dead. But nothing was ever done. Nothing ever stuck. Now, under the white shroud of the forest, Buck's darkness had returned in full. In the clearing, the wolves were moving. Their prints gathered in the snow, faint, deliberate, and many. The scent of death was a signal they couldn't ignore. Blitz barked again, his voice raw with fear. Rook's sharp yelps echoed beside him, desperate and weak. Ember closed her eyes, her body still, her mind fading into something between fear and surrender. The ropes creaked. The wind moaned. And the forest began to wake. Far beyond the ridge, headlights glowed faintly through the trees. A Humvee rumbled slowly over the snow, 3 Marines inside, silent, alert. The Humvee rolled through the frozen wilderness, tires crunching over hard-packed snow. The sky had begun to fade into the deep purple of early dusk, and flakes of snow drifted lazily across the windshield. Inside, the heater hummed weakly, struggling against the Montana cold. Staff Sergeant Clay Rayner sat behind the wheel, his gloved hands gripping tight. He was in his mid-30s, tall, broad-shouldered, and cut from the kind of quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. His face carried the rugged wear of someone who'd seen too much war and not enough peace. A faint scar trailed from his temple to his jawline, a story he never told. His gray eyes, cold and steady, scanned the tree line. The locals called him Stoneface, but beneath that calm exterior was a man still haunted by loss, the loss of Arrow, his military K-9 partner who died saving him during a firefight in Syria. Since that day, something in Clay had cracked. Not visibly, but deep, where only silence could reach. Beside him sat Corporal Reggie Holt, eyes half closed, tapping a rhythm against his thigh. Reggie was wiry and sharp-eyed, late 20s, with skin the color of polished walnut and a calm that hid his quick instincts. Born and raised in Houston by a single mother who'd worked double shifts to keep food on the table, Reggie had learned early to read danger before it arrived. In the back seat, Lance Corporal Milo Banks leaned against the window, chewing sunflower seeds and spitting shells into an empty bottle. He was the youngest, barely 24, with a mop of unruly curls under a faded beanie and a grin that could disarm just about anyone. He'd once studied veterinary science before enlisting, a dream interrupted by duty. "Getting more reports," Clay said, nodding toward the radio on the dash. "Locals keep hearing movement out here. Howls, 2. Milo's grin faded. Wolves don't come this far south, not unless they're starving. Reggie adjusted his rifle, eyes narrowing as the trees closed in. They're starving then. Look around, nothing but ice and ghosts. Clay steered the Humvee off the main path and onto a narrow forest road. The headlights sliced through the dark, catching on skeletal branches. We'll do one last sweep near the ridge, then head back before the storm rolls in. None of them knew that less than half a mile away, 3 small lives hung between death and salvation. Back in the clearing, the night had deepened. The last trace of sunlight disappeared behind the ridgeline, draping the forest in bruised blue and ash-gray shadow. The ropes creaked as the wind howled through the branches, turning the sound into a kind of mourning. Blitz twisted weakly in the air, his paws scraping at nothing, breath coming in ragged bursts. Rook whimpered beside him, body trembling uncontrollably. Ember, the quiet one, tilted her head toward the forest, ears twitching at a sound only she could seem to hear. Then came the first howl. Low. Distant. A ripple of dread crawling across the snow. Another followed, closer. From the black wall of pines, shapes began to move. Shadows slipping soundlessly between the trees. The wolves had arrived. Rook let out a sharp, panicked bark, his voice cracking in fear. Blitz growled through the pain, twisting as if he could shield the others with his own body. The rope burned deeper into his chest. He didn't stop. Then, the pack leader emerged, a massive black wolf with amber eyes that glowed in the half-light. It moved with deadly grace, each step a whisper. The other wolves fanned out behind it, silent as smoke. Ember's ears pinned back. Rook cried out. Blitz barked again, furious, defiant. And then, light. A sudden, blinding beam tore through the dark. Headlights. The wolves froze, hackles raised. Hold up, Clay muttered, hitting the brakes. You see that? The Humvee rolled to a stop. Clay grabbed his flashlight, his sidearm already drawn. The others followed, stepping out into the cold. The forest swallowed their boots' crunch. The clearing opened before them, and everything stopped. What the hell, Milo whispered, his voice barely audible. Clay froze. 3 puppies, hanging from tree branches, bodies trembling, ropes biting deep into fur. German shepherds. Young. Barely alive. Reggie's flashlight shook slightly. Someone did this. Someone hung them. Not on my watch, Clay muttered, storming forward. He could see it, the fear in Blitz's eyes, the same look Arrow had the day he died. Reggie, cover left. Milo, with me. The wolves stirred again at the edge of the light, their eyes glinting between the trees. Milo dropped his pack. We need to get them down now. Clay didn't hesitate. He sprinted to Blitz, knife flashing in his gloved hand. One slash, the rope snapped. The big pup dropped into his arms, limp but breathing. Got you, Clay whispered, voice cracking. You're safe now. Reggie was next. He reached Rook, climbing just high enough to cut the rope while the small dog whimpered in panic. Rook hit the snow and rolled, gasping. Milo raced to Ember. She didn't struggle when he touched her. Instead, she looked straight into his eyes, trusting, broken, silent, then licked his hand. Before they could breathe, a growl rumbled through the trees. The wolves were closing in again. Circle up. Clay ordered. The 3 Marines formed a tight ring, rifles up, the pups huddled in the middle. The growling grew louder, a chorus of hunger and challenge. Then, a sound cut through it, human this time. A hoarse, rough voice. Hey! Get away from them. All 3 Marines turned. A figure stumbled from the shadows, tall, gaunt, wearing a long coat that flapped in the wind. A rifle hung across his back. His breath steamed in the cold, leaving red flecks in the snow behind him. Clay raised his weapon. Drop it. Now. The man stopped. Thin, pale eyes darting. Late 50s. Wild, twitching. They ain't yours, he rasped. Now, Clay repeated, stepping forward. The man, Jasper Fitch, froze. Once a hunter who had worked under Buck Halverson, he'd been living off-grid for years, surviving on meat and madness. Tonight, he had come to check his traps. Their bait, Jasper muttered, voice cracking. Milo's face twisted in disgust. You sick. Enough, Clay snapped. Drop the weapon. But Jasper didn't. He bolted, vanishing into the forest like smoke. Clay raised his weapon but didn't fire. He wasn't after revenge. Not yet. He knelt beside the pups instead. Blitz stood in front of the others, growling softly at the retreating wolves. Even broken, he stood guard. Clay placed a hand on his back. Let's get you home, soldier. Snow began to fall again, soft and heavy, covering the blood and rope, burying the evil that had been left behind. But not forgotten. The wind cut harder as Staff Sergeant Clay Rayner stepped back into the clearing, his boots sinking into snow that was now streaked with red. His breath came out in steaming bursts, every exhale clouding the freezing air. What lay before him wasn't just cruelty, it was a memory reborn. 3 German shepherd pups dangled from the trees, their tiny bodies twisting helplessly against the rope. Their cries were thin and fading, breaking the silence like splinters. For a moment, Clay couldn't move. His eyes locked on Blitz, the biggest, still growling through exhaustion, his chest heaving, his paws clawing at nothing. And in that second, the past crashed into him. Arrow. His partner. His friend. A roadside ambush in Syria. The dust. The screams. The blood that refused to stop. He tried everything, his own hands pressing against the wound, but Arrow had slipped away before the helicopter arrived. He had buried that pain under discipline and missions, but now it clawed its way back up, raw and burning. Clay. Milo's voice snapped him out of it. We gotta move. Clay blinked, steadied himself, and raised his M9. One shot fired into the air, a thunderclap through the trees. The wolves scattered back into the dark, their howls breaking apart like shattered glass. Reggie, get up the tree. Milo, perimeter, Clay barked, his tone hard as steel. Reggie didn't hesitate. Slinging his rifle, he climbed the nearest pine, branches shaking under his weight. He moved like someone who'd done this before, precise, deliberate, fast. His gloved hands found the lowest branch where Rook swung, trembling violently. Below, Milo crouched low, knife ready, eyes scanning the tree line. His breath came in quick puffs as snowflakes melted against his curls. Come on, wolves, he muttered, teeth clenched. Try me. Clay moved first, slicing through Blitz's rope. The pup fell into his arms, limp, barely breathing but alive. Not today, Clay whispered, clutching him tight. You're not going out like this. Across the clearing, Reggie reached Rook and cut the rope clean. The small pup dropped into the snow, coughing weakly. Reggie barely had time to exhale before a flash of gray lunged from the darkness. Contact. Left flank. Milo shouted. A wolf, lean, scarred, and missing one ear, came in fast, snarling. Reggie swung with his rifle but missed, and the beast clamped its jaws into his thigh. Reggie shouted in pain, blood darkening the snow. Clay turned instantly. Hold your ground. Milo was already moving. He dove low, knife flashing silver in the moonlight, driving it into the wolf's side. The animal yelped, released Reggie, and staggered backward before melting into the shadows. Clay fired a warning shot, another thunderous echo. The wolves scattered again, retreating just beyond the circle of light. Reggie grit his teeth, blood seeping through his cargo pants. Could be worse, he grunted. Yeah, well, it's not over, Clay said, nodding toward the last pup still swinging in the tree. Milo, with me. They sprinted toward Ember. She hung motionless, eyes wide, body limp but breathing. When Clay climbed up and met her gaze, something hit him, calm, acceptance, and a quiet kind of strength. She's not even struggling, he murmured, cutting the rope cleanly. Ember dropped straight into Milo's waiting arms. She didn't whine. She just looked up at him once, then buried her face against his jacket. We got all three, Milo said breathlessly. But before relief could take hold, the growls returned, deeper this time, closer. 5 wolves emerged from the shadows, eyes glowing, bodies tense. The pack had reformed. Fire if they charge, Clay ordered quietly. The Marines formed up, back to back, the pups behind them. The air was thick with tension, heavy enough to taste. Then, a sound cut through it. A whistle. Long, shrill. Human. The wolves froze mid-step. Another whistle followed, lower, commanding. And just like that, the pack turned and vanished into the trees. Silence dropped heavy over the clearing. Only the wind remained. Milo's voice broke it first. What the hell was that? Someone's out there, Clay muttered, scanning the ridge. Watching. Behind them, Blitz nudged his leg weakly. His tail flicked once, slow but certain. Clay looked down at him and sighed. Yeah, he said softly. We're watching too. They wrapped the pups in emergency blankets and called for evac over the radio. Reggie's wound would need stitches. Blitz's chest was marked by deep rope burns, Ember's paw was twisted at the joint, and Rook had cuts across his stomach, scars of a fight he hadn't been able to win. By the time a second Humvee arrived, snow was falling again, soft and slow, blanketing the ground like mercy. The vehicle pulled up with a hiss of brakes. The driver stepped out, Gunnery Sergeant Dana Fox, sharp-featured, red-haired, and built like a mountain that didn't move for anyone. Her eyes swept over the scene, the blood, the ropes, the trembling pups. What in God's name happened here? Clay didn't answer right away. He handed her Ember, who whimpered softly and pressed her face into Dana's jacket. Get us home, Clay said quietly. We'll explain on the way. The cabin they reached wasn't much, an old ranger outpost tucked beneath tall spruce trees. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow, and the door groaned open with a metallic creak that carried through the still night. But inside, it was safe. Clay entered first, Blitz in his arms. The pup shivered violently, too weak to stand. Clay's jaw tightened as he laid him down near the flickering wood stove. The heat spread slowly, thawing the chill that clung to their clothes and bones. The room was small, a stove, a couch, a battered table with a lantern, and shelves of old survival gear. It smelled of dust, pine, and smoke. Reggie followed, limping, Rook bundled in his arms. He grimaced as he lowered himself onto the couch, wincing when his thigh flared with pain. Still, he held the pup close, one hand resting protectively on its back. Milo brought up the rear, Ember tucked beneath his coat. Her fur was still damp, her eyes half closed, but she nuzzled against his chest when he whispered, "You're okay now, sweetheart. You're safe." They moved quickly. Clay stoked the fire until it roared, the orange glow spilling warmth across the small space. Reggie set Rook down on a folded blanket, his leg bleeding through the bandage. Milo unzipped his jacket, laid Ember near the stove, and brushed snow from her coat. Clay knelt beside Blitz. His hands trembled as he opened the med kit. When he pulled back the blanket, his breath hitched, a raw, red groove cut deep across Blitz's chest, where the rope had chewed through fur and skin. Dried blood clung thick to the wound. Clay froze. His mind flickered again to Arrow, lying in the dust, chest heaving, his eyes full of trust. He swallowed hard. "Clay," Milo said softly from across the room. Let me handle it. Clay shook his head. No. I've got it. He dabbed antiseptic onto the wound. Blitz whimpered but didn't pull away. Clay's glove stained red as he cleaned carefully, methodically, his jaw locked against the storm inside him. Across the room, Reggie sat quietly, hands still on Rook's small frame. The pup was asleep now, chest rising slow and steady. The firelight danced across Reggie's face, eyes distant, remembering. Before the Corps, Reggie had been a rescue worker in Georgia, hurricanes, floods, devastation. He'd once pulled a shepherd from the rubble of a collapsed house, half-starved but alive. The dog had stayed with him for years, until one night, she'd been hit by a drunk driver. Her name was Pepper. He'd never spoken about her again, until tonight. Milo, crouched beside Ember, examined her paw with gentle precision. Sprain, he murmured. She'll walk again in a few days. He wrapped it carefully with soft gauze from his own supply. He'd always had a way with animals, patient, intuitive. Before the Marines, he'd worked at a small veterinary clinic in Oregon, learning to listen not just to heartbeats but to silence, to what animals didn't say. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of fire and the whisper of the wind outside. Clay finally leaned back, wiping his hands clean. He's okay, he said softly, nodding toward Blitz. He just needs rest. Blitz stirred, inching closer until his muzzle pressed against Clay's boot. Reggie chuckled faintly. Looks like you've been claimed, Sarge. Milo grinned. Happened to me too. Ember had rested her head on his knee, eyes closed. Clay looked around the cabin, 3 soldiers, 3 dogs, 3 broken stories intersecting by fate. You think they were just dumped out there? Milo asked quietly. No, Reggie said. Those knots were deliberate. Someone wanted them gone. But they didn't get their wish, Clay muttered. No one spoke after that. Blitz slowly lifted his head and licked Clay's hand once, a small gesture, but it felt like a promise. You know, Reggie said after a moment, if these pups are staying, we should name him proper. Clay glanced down. They already have names. Blitz, he said, nodding to the big one. Rook. His eyes moved to the smallest. And Ember. Milo blinked. How do you know? Clay smiled faintly. They told me. Reggie snorted, shaking his head. Man's losing it. But no one argued. Outside, the storm softened to a hush. Inside, 6 souls, scarred, tired, but alive, drifted toward sleep under the warm glow of firelight. Sometimes healing doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And that night, it whispered in the breath of 3 rescued pups. Morning arrived gently, the kind of morning that looked too peaceful for the night that came before. A silver light draped across the cabin, stretching over the snow outside and slipping through the frosted windowpanes. The forest was silent except for the occasional sigh of wind and the faint popping of the stove fire still burning low. 3 small shapes slept near its warmth, Blitz, Rook, and Ember, curled tightly together, their chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Clay Rayner stood by the doorway, one hand resting against the wooden frame as he stared into the snow-covered clearing. His eyes were tired, haunted but focused. He'd barely slept. Blitz had limped to his side twice during the night, refusing to let him stand watch alone. Now, the pup rested peacefully near the fire, his body healed just enough to breathe without pain. Behind Clay, Milo Banks moved quietly, packing up gear, a camera, a notepad, and a pair of protein bars. He'd washed his face in a bowl of melted snow, his curls still damp. The footprints will still be there, he murmured, tightening a strap on his bag. Snow wasn't deep enough to bury everything. Reggie Holt, sitting near the fire, nodded in agreement. He was propped up on the couch, his thigh tightly bandaged, Rook nestled in a sling across his lap. The bleeding had mostly stopped, though the pain was obvious in his jaw every time he shifted. Whoever did this didn't care to hide it, Reggie said. They didn't think anyone would come looking. Clay turned from the door, his face set. Exactly. Which means they were confident they'd get away with it. The dogs stirred as the men gathered their equipment. Ember was the first to rise, stretching gracefully, her reddish fur catching the sunlight. Rook blinked awake next, sniffing Reggie's sleeve before curling up again. Blitz, slow but steady, stood and walked to Clay's side, tail wagging weakly. Clay bent down, scratching behind his ears. Ready, soldier. The pup's eyes met his, alert, determined. They moved out shortly after dawn, boots crunching through fresh snow, rifles slung but hands relaxed. The dogs followed without leashes, staying close, their paw prints trailing neatly beside the men's. They didn't have to walk far. Less than a mile from where the pups had been found, Clay spotted tire tracks, wide treads crusted with mud and half filled with slush. He crouched, brushing snow away with his glove. Old truck, he muttered. Tires worn, no chains. Whoever it was didn't care about getting stuck. Next to the tracks, a boot print was frozen into the earth, deep at the heel, the sole worn smooth. Size 11 or 12, Clay noted. Civilian. No tread pattern. Not military. Milo took photos from different angles, his breath fogging the lens. That's fresh. Within a day, maybe less. Ember sniffed the ground, ears flicking. She turned toward the deeper woods and gave a low whine. She's got something, Reggie said, pushing off the truck for balance. They followed her lead. The trees thickened as they climbed a small rise, and soon the woods opened into a small clearing where an old shack stood, leaning slightly as if exhausted by time. The wood was dark, warped by weather, the roof patched with rusted tin and sheets of tarp. Smoke drifted faintly from a crooked pipe on the side, the last whisper of a dying fire. Reggie stopped, jaw tightening. Looks lived in. Or just left, Clay said quietly. Recently. Blitz growled low, tail stiff, body alert. The Marines exchanged glances, they trusted the dog's instincts now. Easy, Clay murmured, signaling the others to spread out. Milo veered off to the right, flashlight cutting through the cold light. His beam landed on something behind the shack, a small chain-link enclosure half buried in snow. It was a kennel. The closer he got, the worse the air smelled, rust, rot, and the faint sweetness of decay. The fence was mangled and the latches snapped clean off. Inside were scraps of rope, tufts of fur, and straw frozen into dark, reddish mats. Milo crouched, his voice low and heavy. This wasn't just a pen. This was where they held them. Reggie arrived beside him, grimacing. For training. Milo shook his head. For something else. He picked up a plastic bowl turned upside down in the snow, flipping it over with a gloved hand. No food. Just filth. They didn't mean to keep them alive. Reggie marked coordinates on his GPS, his face hard. We'll send it in. Clay, meanwhile, stood at the shack door. It hung slightly ajar, the wood warped and swollen from moisture. He pushed it open slowly. The hinges groaned like an animal in pain. The smell hit him first, old blood, urine, and something sickly sweet beneath. He stepped inside. The room was small and dim, lit only by a shaft of daylight slicing through a hole in the roof. Shelves lined the wall, cluttered with rusted tools, chipped jars, and dull knives. The air felt thick, heavy with cruelty that had lingered too long. In the far corner sat a steel cabinet, its door half open. On the floor beside it lay a coil of thick hemp rope, crusted with dried blood. Clay froze. Blitz padded up beside him, sniffed once, then growled deep in his throat. Milo entered behind them, camera raised. That's it, he whispered. That's the same rope. Reggie limped in, his eyes darkening when he saw it. You okay, Clay? Clay didn't answer at first. His fists had tightened at his sides. The flash of Arrow's last breath hit him again, sharp and unrelenting. Then Blitz whined softly beside him, breaking the spell. Clay exhaled, forcing himself to relax. "This is what they used," he said finally. "Same fiber. Same knot." Milo nodded, voice tight. "Got it on camera." They searched the rest of the shack, drawers filled with scraps, animal bones, old ammunition. In one corner, a cot sat under a filthy blanket. Above it, on the wall, were tallies scratched into the wood, dozens of them. No one spoke about what they might mean. When they stepped back outside, the cold air felt cleaner somehow. But the silence was heavier. Blitz paused at the threshold and looked back once, ears pinned, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Then he turned toward the trees and started walking. Clay followed, his jaw set. "It's not over," he said. "But it's a start." Hours later, the snow began to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, blanketing their tracks as they made their way back toward the ridge. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting. None of them noticed the faint movement far behind them, a figure emerging from the trees, eyes pale and cold, watching as the Marines disappeared into the storm. The rope in his hand matched the one they'd found. The storm rolled in just after noon. The wind had shifted first, whispering warnings through the pines. By the time the snow began to fall, the air already carried a scent that made Clay Rayner's skin prickle, not pine, not wood smoke, but something metallic, sharp, and wrong. He stood near the edge of the clearing, his rifle slung across his back, hands loose at his sides. Behind him, the old shack loomed silent, sagging under the weight of new snow. The memory of the bloodied rope inside still hung in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Milo Banks knelt near the broken kennel, his flashlight beam cutting through the flurries. Ember sat close beside him, ears perked, nose twitching. Reggie Holt leaned against the Humvee, his injured leg stiff, Rook nestled in the sling across his chest. The pup's head poked out just far enough to sniff the cold air. Everything was still, too still. Then, the low rumble of an engine broke the silence. Tires crunched over frozen gravel, distant but closing fast. Clay's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed toward the tree line. "He's coming," he said quietly. Through the curtain of snow, headlights flickered, faint and yellow. A truck appeared, sputtering down the narrow forest path, an old Ford from the 1970s, dented panels mismatched and streaked with rust. One headlight flickered. The engine coughed and died as it rolled to a stop near the shack. The driver's door creaked open. Buck Halverson stepped out. He looked like a man carved out of the wilderness itself, tall but hunched, lean and mean under layers of flannel and canvas. His beard, wiry and gray, was tangled with snowflakes. His skin was weathered and windburned, his eyes small and pale, like slivers of ice that hadn't thawed in years. He tossed his keys onto the seat and shut the door with a hollow thud. "Well," Buck drawled, voice rough as gravel, "either I've got company I didn't invite, or you boys are more lost than you look." Clay didn't move. "We're not lost. We're looking for someone who hurt 3 dogs and left them to die in the woods." For a split second, something flickered in Buck's expression, something almost human, before it hardened again. "Dogs, huh?" He smirked. "Didn't know the Marines were running an animal shelter now." Milo stepped forward, jaw tight. "We found your rope. Your shack. And the blood." Buck's eyes darted to the side, barely a twitch, but Clay saw it. "You think I'm the only man out here with rope?" Buck said, voice sharp now, defensive. Before anyone could respond, Blitz let out a low growl. He'd been behind the cabin, sniffing the air, but now he trotted into view, limping slightly but fierce, his eyes locked on Buck. Ember and Rook followed, staying close behind. The change in Buck's face was instant. His smirk faltered. "You recognize them?" Clay asked, voice even. Nope. Blitz barked, short and sharp, a sound that cut through the snow. You sure about that? Milo said. Because they seem to recognize you. Buck took one small step back. His jaw tightened, his right hand twitching toward the shack. Don't, Clay warned, raising his rifle slightly. Buck stopped mid-motion. His voice dropped to a growl. I don't take kindly to strangers sniffing around my property. You gave up that right when you started hanging puppies from trees, Reggie snapped, stepping forward despite the pain in his leg. Buck's eyes flared. For a heartbeat, the mask dropped, revealing something mean and cold, something that had festered too long in the dark. Then he moved. He spun on his heel, shoving open the cabin door and lunging inside. Gun! Clay shouted. He sprinted forward, boots pounding the snow, shoulder slamming into the door before it could close. The impact rattled the frame. Inside, Buck was already reaching for a rifle propped in the corner. Clay didn't hesitate. He tackled him. The two men crashed into the wall, wood splintering under their weight. The rifle clattered to the floor and skidded away. Buck roared, swinging wildly, but Clay had the advantage, training, precision, and fury. He slammed Buck's arm to the ground, twisting until bone cracked. Buck screamed. Outside, the dogs barked in a frenzy. Ember circled the Humvee, snarling. Blitz lunged toward the doorway, hackles raised. Rook barked from Reggie's sling, a high, sharp cry of alarm. Reggie aimed his pistol at the doorway, covering Clay. You good, Sarge? Inside, Milo rushed in behind Clay, sliding to a stop on the wooden floor. I've got him. Clay barked, pinning Buck's wrists. Buck thrashed beneath him, spitting curses, face smeared with blood from a split lip. You don't get to do this again, Clay hissed through clenched teeth. I didn't kill no dogs. Buck growled. You tried, Clay snapped. Milo pulled a zip tie from his pouch and secured Buck's wrists behind his back. The old man jerked and cursed, but the fight was gone from his limbs. He's not going anywhere, Milo said, stepping back. Clay pushed to his feet, chest heaving. The firelight flickered through the cabin window, throwing long shadows across the floor, the rifle lying useless in the corner, the rope still hanging by the wall, silent witnesses to everything Buck had done. Outside, the storm had slowed to a heavy flurry. Blitz barked once, then stopped as Clay stepped out into the snow. Reggie was already on the radio, voice steady. Confirmed suspect in custody. Requesting local law enforcement and animal rescue, coordinates transmitting now. Clay knelt beside Blitz, brushing snow from his fur. The pup leaned against him, his breathing shaky but calm. For the first time, there was no fear in his eyes, just trust. He's going away, huh? Reggie said, limping up beside him. Yeah, Clay replied. He is. Milo emerged from the shack carrying a small wooden box, his brow furrowed. Ember trotted at his side. Found these in a drawer, he said, setting it down. Inside were dozens of metal tags, dog tags, some old, some recent, all with names scratched or half erased. Records, Milo whispered. Dogs he trained, maybe, or killed. Clay stared at the box for a long moment, jaw locked. Then he picked up Blitz, lifting him gently into his arms. Let's get them out of here, he said. We're done with this place. Snow fell thicker now, muting every sound except the steady hum of the approaching sirens, faint, distant, but drawing closer. Justice wasn't loud that day. It didn't come with fury or fire. It came quietly, in snow and silence, as three rescued pups huddled against their saviors, eyes closing in peace for the first time. The next morning, the sun rose shyly over the Montana plains. It broke through the low clouds in soft gold streaks, scattering light over the snowdrifts that blanketed the ground like a promise of peace after a long night of chaos. The convoy rolled slowly down the gravel road toward Camp Willow Ridge, a weathered but proud Marine outpost nestled between mountain ridges and pine forests. The base looked different in daylight, a mixture of strength and solitude. Rows of snow-dusted barracks, gravel paths lined with tire marks, and flags snapping in the faint breeze. It was a place where soldiers with scars, visible or hidden, came to find steady ground again. Clay Rayner stepped out of the lead Humvee first. His boots crunched on thawing gravel. His uniform still bore stains from the forest, mud, blood, and melted snow. He was exhausted, but the small bundle in his arms seemed to make the weight of it all easier to bear. Blitz, the sable-furred shepherd, curled tightly against Clay's chest, breathing slow and steady. Behind him, Milo Banks climbed down, Ember tucked under one arm, licking frost from her whiskers. Reggie Holt followed, limping but upright, Rook still nestled in his sling, fast asleep and dreaming. A few soldiers jogging laps around the compound slowed to a stop, watching the trio with curious silence. The sight of 3 Marines carrying puppies, battered but alive, felt like something sacred. They didn't need to ask what had happened. They could see it written all over the men's faces, the mixture of exhaustion and relief that comes only from surviving the impossible. Inside the admin building, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly. Behind the front desk sat Sergeant Lynn Whitaker, a woman whose posture radiated both command and care. Her gray hair was tied into a neat bun, her face marked by years of wind, war, and wisdom. She looked up from a stack of paperwork as the 3 Marines entered, each cradling a pup wrapped in emergency blankets. Her eyes widened. "Good Lord," she murmured. "You weren't kidding about the call." Clay gave a small nod. "We'd like to file for medical intake, and adoption requests. 1 for each handler." Lynn raised an eyebrow, her expression softening. "Not wasting any time, are you?" Reggie, still favoring his leg, smiled faintly. "They picked us first." Lynn's lips twitched into something close to a grin. "Fair enough. Let's get the paperwork started." Within minutes, forms were spread across the counter. Reggie and Milo began filling theirs out while Clay stood nearby, absently rubbing Blitz's neck. The pup leaned into his touch, tail thumping weakly against his arm. Lynn glanced up as she signed off on one of the forms. "You boys got names for them?" Clay nodded once. "This one's Blitz. Means lightning, in German. Fast, sharp, even when he's hurting." Milo smiled, brushing Ember's soft ear. "She's Ember. Quiet, steady. Burns low, but never goes out." Reggie chuckled, tapping Rook's sleeping head. "And this guy?" "Rook. Like the chess piece. Doesn't move much, but when he does, it counts." Lynn gave a small laugh. "Warrior names for little soldiers. I like it." They were taken next to the base infirmary, a sterile, bright space filled with the faint hum of heaters and the smell of antiseptic. Inside waited Staff Sergeant Micah Leong, the base medic and unofficial animal caretaker. A thin man with round glasses and a calm, steady presence, Micah greeted them with quiet respect. "Let's take a look at our heroes," he said gently, holding out his hands for Blitz. He worked quickly but carefully. "Minor ligament strain," he murmured, wrapping Blitz's leg with gauze. "He'll heal fine with rest." He moved to Rook next. "Bruised ribs, no fractures." Then to Ember. "She's healthy. Bit of stress and a sore paw, but she'll be good as new." Milo exhaled in relief. "Guess we brought home some tough ones." Micah smiled faintly. "Tough, but lucky." Later that afternoon, the 3 Marines guided the pups through the rehabilitation wing, a quieter section of the base used for therapy and recovery. The hallway walls were lined with photographs, soldiers kneeling beside service dogs, prosthetic legs beside wagging tails, medals resting next to worn collars. The air carried a kind of reverence. Each Marine was assigned a sleeping pod, equipped with a cot, a desk, and a small kennel. But when night came, none of the dogs stayed in theirs. Clay sat at his desk, typing his report on Buck Halverson, the charges, the evidence, the rescue, when he felt a nudge against his knee. Blitz had escaped the blanket again and now stood beside him, eyes calm, tail sweeping lazily across the floor. "You're not gonna let me finish this, huh?" Clay murmured. Blitz just pressed his head against Clay's leg, a silent claim of loyalty. From the hallway, Milo's voice echoed with a grin. "Looks like you're the one being adopted, Sergeant." Outside, Reggie had set up a small course near the training yard, 3 low wooden platforms and a ramp. Rook sniffed around cautiously, tail flicking. "Therapy basics," Reggie said to no one in particular. "Slow, steady. No yelling, no pressure." He patted the first platform. "Up." Rook hesitated, then climbed on top, plopped down, and gave a small bark as if to say, "Done." Reggie chuckled. "Yeah, you're a Rook all right, patient and stubborn." A few soldiers paused to watch, leaning on the fence. Some smiled. Others just stood quietly, soaking in the rare sight of peace in motion. That evening, as twilight settled, the 3 men gathered near the fire pit behind the barracks. The flames crackled and danced, reflecting in their eyes. Milo sat cross-legged, ember curled at his boots. Reggie leaned back against a log, Rook resting in his lap. Clay sat between them, Blitz at his feet, eyes half closed in the glow. "You ever think something like this would happen?" Milo asked softly. Clay stared into the flames. The image of the hanging ropes flickered in his mind, then faded. "No," he said finally. "But maybe it needed to." Reggie nodded slowly. "They're not just dogs. They're second chances." None of them spoke after that. The fire crackled, the cold air hummed, and above them the stars began to show, silent witnesses to 3 men and 3 lives they'd saved. That night, for the first time in a long time, the base felt lighter. And far from the place where pain had once ruled, hope began to take root. 3 weeks passed like the slow turning of a fragile page. The winter snow, once thick and merciless, began to soften under the sun's gentle return. Spring crept into Camp Willow Ridge, melting the last stubborn drifts that clung to the corners of buildings and shaded fields. The air smelled of thawed pine, damp earth, and something new, something alive. The mountains that loomed beyond the camp were still capped with white, but their slopes shimmered under morning light. Birds had returned, filling the stillness with music again. And in the midst of it all, 3 dogs had become the soul of the base. Each day started the same way now. Staff Sergeant Clay Rayner, still stoic and methodical, stepped out of his quarters at dawn. One sharp whistle cut through the crisp air. From across the yard, Blitz appeared, stronger now, his limp almost gone, his coat glossy beneath the early light. He bounded through the gravel, ears perked, tail slicing the air like a banner. Clay bent to meet him halfway, a faint smile crossing his face, rare, but real. "Morning, partner," he said softly. Blitz barked once in reply, falling into stride beside him as they began their morning run. Across the yard, Reggie Holt was setting up cones for scent work. Rook trotted nearby, nose twitching, eyes sharp. The pup had grown into his paws, still small but confident, curious, and calm in a way that grounded everyone around him. Reggie placed small containers along the path, each carrying a faint trace of human scent. "Find it," he said quietly. Rook sniffed, circled once, and then sat firmly beside the 3rd cone. Reggie laughed under his breath. "Smart boy." Rook wagged once, satisfied. When other Marines walked by, they often stopped to watch, some out of curiosity, others because Rook had a way of making the noise in their heads quiet down for a while. One soldier, a man who hadn't smiled in months, started bringing treats just to watch Rook's tail wag. Inside the therapy wing, Milo Banks knelt beside a patient chair, Ember sitting calmly next to him. Her once wounded paw was healed now, her coat a rich copper glow under the room's light. She had a gentleness that drew people in, no barking, no jumping, just quiet presence. Her approach was always the same, a slow step forward, a soft nudge with her nose, and then stillness. And somehow, in that stillness, people exhaled. She was a healer in fur and silence. Milo had known she would be. Before the war, before the Marines, he'd seen animals work miracles with people too broken to speak. Watching Ember now, easing trauma not with words but with touch, confirmed what he'd always believed: healing doesn't always sound like talking. Sometimes, it sounds like breathing again. Among the veterans at Willow Ridge was Corporal Dennis "Denny" Kramer, a man built like a wall but hollow inside. Years of war had carved lines into his face that weren't from age. He rarely spoke. He didn't attend therapy sessions. He ate alone. Until Rook found him. It happened during lunch one afternoon. The mess hall was loud with chatter and clinking trays, but Denny sat at the corner table, staring into nothing. Rook wandered in, tail wagging lazily, and dropped a tennis ball at Denny's feet. The man didn't react. Rook waited. Then picked the ball up, dropped it again, and sat back down. Still nothing. By the third day, Rook did the same, persistent, patient. And finally, Denny sighed, picked up the ball, and tossed it a few feet away. Rook bounded after it, returned, and dropped it again. That small exchange, a throw and a return, became their ritual. Within a week, people noticed Denny smiling again, even laughing once. No one commented. No one needed to. The change at Camp Willow Ridge was slow but steady. Soldiers who had once kept to themselves now came out to the yard in the mornings, coffee cups in hand, to watch the pups train. Others volunteered to walk them, brush them, or simply sit in their presence. The dogs had become more than rescues. They were bridges, silent, patient bridges between pain and peace. And Clay Rayner saw it clearly. One evening, long after the others had turned in, he sat at his desk beneath the low light of a flickering lamp. Blitz lay curled at his feet, breathing softly. Clay's fingers hovered over the keyboard of his laptop, the screen glowing faintly. At the top of a blank document, he typed: Project Proposal, Guardian Paws Initiative. The idea had been growing in him since that night in the woods. He'd seen what rescue dogs could do, not just survive, but heal. Not just comfort, but rebuild. If these 3 pups could mend what war had shattered in him, what could they do for others like him? He worked late into the night, drafting every line with purpose. The proposal outlined a new program within Camp Willow Ridge, a canine-assisted therapy center built on the bond between soldiers and rescue dogs. It would train both, man and animal, to heal together. He included studies, testimonies, field data from military K-9 programs. But he also added photos: Blitz curled beside a PTSD patient, Ember lying across a veteran's lap during a panic episode, Rook standing guard near Denny's cot during a nightmare. He ended the document with a single line. Sometimes healing doesn't come from medicine. Sometimes it comes on 4 paws. The approval came faster than anyone expected, for days. By the end of the week, a transport truck arrived at the gates, carrying 5 new dogs, each one scarred by their own history. A small beagle named Penny, blind in one eye but curious about everything. A husky named Cole, who flinched at loud sounds but howled whenever someone played a harmonica. A golden retriever named Winston, once chained behind a foreclosed house, now free and wagging beside Ember as if he'd never known sorrow. The base came alive with energy. Soldiers who had long withdrawn from the world now showed up with bowls, brushes, and smiles. Among the newcomers was Sarah Null, a trauma counselor recently assigned to Willow Ridge. She was tall and calm, her auburn hair tied back in a braid, her voice soft but sure. She had seen pain, and had lost to it, too. Years earlier, she'd lost her brother, a Marine, to suicide after deployment. That grief had shaped her purpose. When she first saw the dogs, she smiled. And when Blitz curled up quietly at her feet during a group session, she whispered, "You sure know how to pick the broken ones, don't you?" Guardian Paws officially launched with a small ceremony on the training field. Folding chairs lined the gravel, the flags of every service branch waving behind a wooden podium. Soldiers, therapists, families, and even reporters gathered, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Clay stood at the front, papers trembling slightly in his hands. He wasn't nervous, just moved. He looked out over the crowd, at the dogs lying calmly beside their handlers, at the men and women who had come to listen. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice steady, we found 3 German Shepherd puppies hanging from a tree. Someone tried to erase them, to end their story before it began. But they survived. And they reminded us of something we all forget, that purpose can be born from pain. That love doesn't disappear in the dark. It just waits to be found. He paused, letting the silence hold the words. Today, we give that purpose a name. Guardian Paws. Applause broke through the morning air, soft at first, then building. And then, something unexpected happened. From the side of the stage, Rook suddenly stood, tail wagging, ears perked. He trotted forward, climbed onto the platform, and sat beside Clay like a co-speaker claiming his turn. The crowd laughed. Clay couldn't help but smile. Then Blitz and Ember followed, walking up the center aisle, stopping in front of a row of veterans seated in the front. Blitz placed a paw on one man's knee. Ember leaned gently into another's chest. And like a dam breaking, the tears came, not of sorrow, but release. Men who hadn't cried since combat wept openly. Women who had carried silence for years finally exhaled. The pups who had once hung from a tree were now symbols of everything war couldn't destroy, love, loyalty, and healing. That day, Guardian Paws became more than a program. It became a promise. A reminder that God's mercy doesn't always arrive with wings, sometimes, it walks toward us on 4 legs, tail wagging, heart open. Blitz, Rook, and Ember were proof that miracles still find their way through pain. They weren't just rescued dogs. They were redemption wrapped in fur. The months that followed changed everything at Camp Willow Ridge. Summer came quietly, warming the hills and painting the fields with wildflowers. The same grounds that once echoed with drills and commands now hummed with laughter and barks. Soldiers, veterans, and dogs trained side by side, not for battle this time, but for life after it. The Guardian Paws initiative had taken root deeper than anyone imagined. Where there had once been silence in the evenings, there was now music, someone strumming a guitar by the fire pit, others tossing balls across the field while dogs darted through the golden dusk. Healing had a sound again. Clay Rayner had changed too. He still carried the weight of command in his posture, but the heaviness behind his eyes had softened. Every morning began with a routine he refused to skip, coffee in one hand, Blitz trotting loyally beside him through the trail that wound around the ridge. It wasn't about training anymore, it was about presence. Sometimes they didn't speak or move for long minutes. They'd just stand near the old lookout point, wind moving through the grass, mountains stretching endlessly ahead. Clay would glance at Blitz and murmur, "Guess you found me before I found myself." The shepherd would tilt his head, tail flicking once, as if to agree. Reggie Holt had become something of a legend on base. His recovery had been slower, but Rook stayed by his side through every session, every limp, every setback. When his physical therapist said he might never run again, Reggie had just smiled and said, "We'll see about that." By mid-July, he and Rook completed a full mile together, not fast, not perfect, but side by side. When he crossed the line back to the barracks, the soldiers cheered, Rook barked proudly, and Reggie raised his crutch high like a victory flag. Later that night, he sat by the fire, staring into the flames. "You know," he told Rook softly, "I used to think I needed saving. Turns out I just needed someone to walk with me." Rook's tail thumped once against his boot, and that was answer enough. Milo Banks and Ember had become inseparable. She had found her purpose as a therapy dog, and he had rediscovered his as a guide, not for war, but for hearts that had forgotten how to beat freely. They visited hospitals and counseling centers in nearby towns, sitting quietly with patients too anxious to talk. Ember never barked or fussed, she just rested her head on their laps, and somehow that was all it took. Milo often said, "Ember does the talking for me." And she did. Together, they become symbols of gentle resilience, proof that gentleness wasn't weakness, but a form of strength that refused to break even after the world had tried to crush it. The dogs continued to grow, stronger, wiser, more connected. But so did the people. Sarah Null, the trauma counselor, often said the camp wasn't just a base anymore, it was a heartbeat. Each soldier who came through left a little lighter. And every dog that arrived broken learned what love truly meant. When she spoke to new recruits, she told them the story of how it all began, the night 3 pups hung from a tree and a Marine refused to walk away. She never dramatized it. She didn't need to. The story carried its own weight. Sometimes, she'd say quietly, the rescue goes both ways. By late August, the camp's training field had transformed into something sacred. Wooden fences, open-air kennels, shaded rest areas, all built by volunteers. A new sign hung near the entrance, carved by a local veteran who'd lost his sight but still worked with his hands. The wood read, "Guardian Paws, Healing in Motion." Below it, etched smaller, were 6 names. Clay. Milo. Reggie. Blitz. Ember. Rook. That weekend, a storm rolled in from the mountains, heavy rain, thick clouds, lightning cracking through the valley. The dogs huddled under the canopies as thunder boomed. The men gathered in the mess hall, eating soup and telling stories over candlelight. At one point, Milo asked, "You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't gone out that night?" The question hung there for a while. Reggie sighed, setting his spoon down. "We'd still be here," he said, "but maybe not the same people." Clay nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "We were meant to find them. Maybe that's how grace works, it doesn't ask if you're ready. It just shows up." Outside, Blitz barked once at the thunder, unafraid now. And in that moment, everyone felt it, the peace that only comes after storms. A few days later, they received word that Buck Halverson had pled guilty to multiple charges, including cruelty and illegal animal fighting. He'd been sentenced to years behind bars. Clay didn't say much about it. He just stood near the field that evening, watching Blitz chase a tennis ball through the tall grass, tail wagging like a banner of triumph. For the first time in years, Clay didn't feel anger. He felt release. Justice hadn't come from revenge, it had come from choosing compassion instead of hate. He knelt, calling softly, "Blitz, here, boy." The shepherd came running, eyes bright, body strong. Clay caught him mid-run, laughing for the first time in months. It was a sound that carried all the way across the field, the sound of healing, of gratitude, of a man learning to laugh again. Months turned to a full year. By the anniversary of the rescue, Guardian Paws had expanded to 3 other bases and 2 civilian programs. Dozens of dogs had found homes, and hundreds of veterans had found peace. On the morning of the anniversary, a quiet ceremony was held near the old tree line behind Camp Willow Ridge. The same place where it all began. A new wooden post had been placed there, simple, unpainted, but beautiful. A bronze plaque on it read, "In memory of the broken, man and beast, who found their way home." The 3 Marines stood side by side. Their dogs sat patiently in front of them. No speeches. No cameras. Just silence, wind, and sunlight filtering through the trees. Clay whispered, "You did good, Arrow." Reggie rested a hand on Rook's head, grinning. "Guess Pepper's proud of us now." Milo smiled at Ember. "And my mom, she'd have loved you." The dogs didn't understand the words, but somehow, they did. They stayed perfectly still, tails swaying gently, eyes soft. In that stillness, it felt as though the earth itself took a deep breath. Later that day, as evening fell, Clay sat on the cabin steps with Blitz resting against his knee. The horizon glowed orange, fading into pink, and the first stars began to wake. Funny, Clay murmured, how something meant for death turned into life. Blitz's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Clay smiled faintly. You saved me, partner. Guess I'll spend the rest of my life trying to return the favor. He looked up at the sky, the fading colors reflecting in his eyes. And maybe that's the point of it all, to keep saving each other, one soul at a time. Blitz nudged his hand, tail flicking softly. The sound of laughter drifted from the yard where Milo and Reggie played fetch with their dogs. Ember chased the ball, Rook barked, and somewhere in that ordinary moment, the extraordinary lingered, quiet, simple, pure. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or trumpets. Sometimes, they arrive in the form of a faint whimper in the woods. A marine who refuses to walk away. And 3 dogs who were never meant to survive, but did. Because love, real love, doesn't die in darkness. It just waits. And when the time is right, it finds its way home. Dawn broke soft and golden over Camp Willow Ridge. Mist rolled off the river that wound past the training field, and sunlight filtered through pine branches heavy with dew. The base was quiet, that kind of quiet that carries peace instead of emptiness. The world had changed since that night in the forest. The men, the dogs, even the land itself, all carried a stillness that only comes after storms finally end. Inside the small cabin at the edge of the base, Staff Sergeant Clay Rayner stirred his coffee and looked out the window. Blitz lay at his feet, stretched across the rug, chest rising and falling in deep sleep. Clay smiled faintly, watching the shepherd twitch in his dreams, running, perhaps, through fields he could only imagine. Good dreams, soldier, Clay whispered. Outside, the rest of the camp was just beginning to wake. Reggie Holt limped across the yard, tossing a stick for Rook, who darted after it with eager precision. Milo Banks leaned against the fence, arms folded, a gentle smile spreading as Ember rolled in the grass, sunlight glinting off her fur like fire. These small moments, ordinary, unremarkable, were everything they'd fought for. The morning briefing was short. The Guardian Paws initiative had just received another approval, this time for expansion to the East Coast. A full program at Camp Lejeune, where dozens of recovering veterans would soon meet their own canine companions. Clay stood beside the bulletin board, reading the announcement in silence. Reggie approached, coffee in hand. You realize what this means, right? Reggie said, grinning. It's spreading. We started something. Clay nodded. Something that matters. Milo joined them, Ember at his heel. Guess this is what victory looks like. Clay looked out toward the ridge, where sunlight stretched across the snowmelt. Yeah, he said quietly. A different kind of victory. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived at the gate, a woman in a dark jacket, carrying a clipboard and a soft smile. Her name was Dr. Eliza Torres, head of the National Animal Welfare Coalition. She'd read about Guardian Paws in a news article, a small feature that had quietly gone viral. She walked through the camp, shaking hands, meeting soldiers, and kneeling to greet the dogs. Each one seemed to recognize her calm spirit instantly. When she met Clay, she held his gaze a moment longer than expected. You didn't just save 3 animals, she said softly. You started a movement. Clay shrugged slightly, uncomfortable under praise. We just did what anyone should have done. No, she said. Most people would have walked away. Her words hung there, heavy and true. That evening, the camp gathered at the training field for a celebration, nothing fancy, just a bonfire, music, and laughter. The stars above were bright and endless. Someone grilled steaks, someone else brought out an old guitar, and the smell of smoke and spice filled the cool air. Blitz, Rook, and Ember sat near the fire, each beside their marine, watching flames dance in their mirrored eyes. The scene looked almost cinematic, men and dogs framed by the glow of firelight, shadows stretching long across the ground. Sarah Null, the counselor, stood quietly near the edge, recording short clips for a documentary the base was producing. She caught Reggie tossing a stick to Rook, Milo laughing as Ember stole a sandwich from his plate, and Clay sitting beside Blitz, both of them looking into the fire as if it were telling a story only they could hear. Sometimes, Sarah said softly into her recorder, healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from remembering differently. When the fire burned low, Clay stood and looked around the circle. The laughter had quieted, the air still except for the crackling wood. He cleared his throat. When we found those pups, he began, we weren't trying to be heroes. We were just trying to do the right thing. But along the way, they saved us too. He paused, glancing at Blitz, who lifted his head, alert and listening. These dogs taught us what the battlefield never could, that courage isn't about fighting. It's about protecting. Healing. Staying. His voice grew softer. Every man here has carried something heavy, something invisible. These dogs don't take that pain away. They just remind us it's okay to carry it differently. No one moved. Even the night seemed to lean closer to listen. And maybe, Clay said, that's what makes them the real soldiers. The fire popped once, sparks floating upward like small souls finding their way home. Later that night, the men lingered in quiet conversation, watching the stars. Reggie leaned over to Milo. You think they know? Know what? That they were supposed to die, but didn't. Milo smiled faintly, scratching Ember behind the ear. Yeah, he said. I think they know. That's why they live like every second's borrowed. Clay listened, silent but smiling. He reached down to rest a hand on Blitz's head. The shepherd leaned into the touch, eyes closing. Somewhere deep in the trees, an owl called, low and haunting, but not sad. Just present. The kind of sound that reminds you you're alive. As the night stretched on, Clay finally rose and walked toward the far edge of the field. Beyond the fences, the mountains stood silhouetted against the moonlight, ancient, unmoving, eternal. He stopped and looked up, his breath fogging the air. You'd like it here, Arrow, he whispered. They'd all remind you what we fought for. Blitz came up beside him, pressing against his leg. Clay smiled, brushing his fur. Yeah, he murmured. I know you're still here too. Together, they stood there, man and dog, past and present, watching the horizon fade into silver dawn. In the months that followed, the Guardian Paws emblem became more than just a name. It appeared on patches, kennels, and therapy vests across the country. Each one bore the same insignia, a marine hand clasping a paw, framed by the words, "Together, we heal." The program grew far beyond Clay's imagination, and yet, in his heart, it always returned to one image, 3 pups hanging from a tree, and the moment a single decision changed everything. The story spread, not because it was sensational, but because it was true, and because everyone, deep down, hopes for proof that goodness still wins. Months later, Sarah's documentary premiered quietly online. The title read, When the Broken Save the Broken. In the opening shot, Clay's voice spoke softly over footage of Blitz running through an open field at sunrise. We didn't rescue them because we were strong. We rescued them because we remembered what it felt like to be lost. The video ended with a single frame, Blitz, Ember, and Rook lying together under the old willow tree, sun streaming through the leaves. And beneath it, a simple line appeared. Dedicated to every soul who ever found healing in another. That night, while the rest of the base slept, Clay walked once more to the tree line, Blitz padding quietly beside him. The stars shimmered brighter than usual, and the wind carried the faintest sound, like laughter, like wings. He looked down at Blitz. We did it, he whispered. The dog looked up, tail wagging once, slow and sure. Yeah, Clay said softly. We did it. And for the first time, Clay didn't see ghosts when he closed his eyes. He saw light. He saw home. He saw life beginning again. The world doesn't stop for pain. It doesn't wait for hearts to heal, or for the memories to fade. It simply moves, sunrise after sunrise, asking only one thing of us, to keep walking. For Staff Sergeant Clay Rayner, Milo Banks, and Reggie Holt, that walk began in the frozen silence of a forest, where cruelty had almost erased 3 innocent lives. But that same place became the soil where hope took root. What started as a rescue became a rebirth. Because in saving those pups, they unknowingly saved themselves. A year later, the Guardian Paws program had spread across bases, shelters, and hospitals nationwide. Every week, new stories emerged, soldiers paired with dogs who'd known hunger, fear, and abandonment. Each pair finding strength in the other, not because they were unbroken, but because they understood pain the same way. There was Sergeant Dale Monroe, who hadn't spoken in 6 months after losing his unit overseas, until a golden retriever named Scout rested her head in his lap and wouldn't move until he smiled. There was Corporal Jamie Gwynn, who'd suffered burns that made even her reflection unbearable, until a pit mix named Finn licked her scars without hesitation, teaching her that love doesn't flinch. And there was Private Jason Lee, a new recruit, haunted by nightmares from a childhood that felt like a war long before boot camp, until Rook, Reggie's steadfast companion, slept at his feet during his first panic attack and never left his side again. These were not miracles of noise or spectacle. They were miracles of silence, of presence, of gentleness, of trust. And all of it had begun because 3 Marines decided not to turn away. Clay often said later. We thought we were saving dogs. But the truth is, they were saving the human parts of us that war couldn't reach. He said it once during an interview, years later, sitting beside Blitz on a talk show couch. The shepherd, now older and grayer, rested his head on Clay's knee the whole time. When the host asked how Blitz was doing, Clay smiled and said, still on duty. He just works in quieter ways now. The audience laughed softly, but those who knew, understood. Milo and Ember became certified therapy partners, traveling between VA hospitals and children's clinics. Wherever they went, hope followed. There were photos of Ember lying beside patients during surgeries, comforting them through recovery, her calm gaze melting fear into peace. One caption read, "She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to." Reggie stayed on base as an instructor. He trained new handlers, teaching them that control wasn't about power, but about respect. On his desk, he kept a framed picture of Rook sitting proudly in front of a group of young Marines. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The smallest soldier with the biggest heart." And whenever someone asked him why he dedicated his life to the program, Reggie would just smile and say, "Because he never gave up on me, and I'll never give up on anyone else." Guardian Paws continued to grow, transforming from a simple base initiative into a nationwide mission. Rescue centers partnered with veterans' hospitals. Volunteers trained service dogs for those with PTSD, mobility injuries, and emotional trauma. And in every branch of it, in every hand extended, every leash offered, every tail wagging in trust, the spirit of those first 3 pups lived on. Years passed. The seasons cycled again, winter's hush, spring's promise, summer's light, and autumn's golden fade. Blitz grew older. His muzzle silvered, his steps slowed, but his eyes stayed the same, bright, loyal, alive. One evening, Clay sat beside him on the cabin porch, a blanket draped over his shoulders. The sunset spilled amber light across the mountains. Blitz rested his head on Clay's knee, breathing steady. "You remember that night?" Clay whispered. "The snow. The ropes. The wolves." The dog's ears twitched, eyes half closing. Clay smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." He looked up at the horizon, the last light fading. "You taught me that mercy doesn't make you weak, it makes you whole." When Blitz finally passed, it wasn't in pain. It was in peace, surrounded by the family he'd built. Clay buried him beneath the same willow tree where the guardian Paws memorial stood. The plaque above his resting place read simply, "Blitz, the one who pointed to light." That night, Clay didn't cry out of loss. He cried out of gratitude, for everything Blitz had given him, for every broken piece that love had made new. And when the wind moved through the branches, it sounded almost like a whisper. "Good boy." Years later, long after Clay retired and the program became global, his story, their story, continued to ripple. Documentaries, articles, interviews, all told versions of what happened. But the truth never needed embellishment. Because the truth was already powerful enough. Somewhere out there, in shelters and hospitals, veterans and strays still found each other, by fate, by need, by grace. Every time a trembling hand reached out to a frightened animal and neither pulled away. That was the legacy Blitz, Ember, and Rook left behind. Milo, now a counselor himself, once summed it up best. "You can rebuild walls after war, but not hearts. Only love can do that. And sometimes, that love has fur and 4 paws." The final scene always returns to the forest. The same forest where it all began. The trees stand taller now, green and full of life. Birdsong replaces silence. A small wooden sign rests beneath the willow, engraved by hand. For those who refuse to walk away. And sitting beneath it, as though watching over it all, are 3 figures carved from stone, Blitz, Rook, and Ember, forever guarding the place where mercy changed everything. The camera pulls back, the sound of wind whispering through the leaves. And Clay's voice, calm, steady, weathered with time, fades in one last time. If you ever wonder whether kindness still matters, remember this. It only takes one person to stop, one act to choose love over cruelty. One moment of courage to rewrite the story. And sometimes, the ones we save end up saving us right back. The screen fades to black. Then, a single line appears in white text. Dedicated to every veteran, every rescuer, and every animal who never gave up. Soft instrumental music swells, gentle piano and strings, as the credits roll. Photos fade in one by one. Clay and Blitz on a mountainside. Milo and Ember in a children's ward. Reggie and Rook leading a new group of handlers. And finally, the 3 pups together beneath the willow tree, sunlight cutting through the leaves. The last frame lingers just long enough for the viewer to feel it, not sadness, but peace. Because every ending, when born from love, becomes a beginning.